Hiring a black male nanny wasn't part of my plan. But 3 kids, a constantly absent husband, and too many lonely dinners changed my mind. Marcus didn't seduce me. He didn't have to. He listened. He laughed. He stayed. And the night he stayed over, something happened that I've never told anyone until now. Before we begin, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. You're about to hear a true story that starts with help and ends with heartache. And if you've ever had a "what if that still keeps you up at night?" leave it in the comments below. I live in a quiet town, tucked into the foothills of Colorado. The kind of place where leaves crunch under your boots in the fall, where neighbors wave from their porches, and people still talk about what color you paint your mailbox. I used to be the woman who managed everything: soccer practice, birthday cupcakes, spreadsheets from my job as a remote insurance agent, and the laundry mountain that never stopped growing. But something broke last winter, and by the time September came around, I was hanging on by a thread. Tom, my husband, had just started another 6-week rotation with the National Guard. It wasn't unusual. He'd been away more than he'd been home since Ella, our youngest, was born. The problem wasn't just that he was gone. It was that when he was here, he wasn't really here. You know, the kids needed more than I could give. And I needed something I was too embarrassed to admit help. My best friend Dana had this young nanny who used to work for her sister in Boulder. She said he was calm, responsible, great with toddlers, and surprisingly intuitive for a guy. I laughed when she said that. "He's black, just so you know," she added almost like a disclaimer. So I shrugged. "So just be ready for the neighborhood to say something. This town isn't exactly progressive." I rolled my eyes, but I knew she wasn't wrong. Marcus showed up on a Wednesday afternoon, wearing a gray hoodie, sneakers, and a smile that didn't try too hard. My kids fell for him in 5 minutes. It took me maybe 10. I didn't know it yet, but something had started that day. The week before I met Marcus, I cried twice in the grocery store, once in the frozen food aisle because I forgot what I came in for, and once in the parking lot because my toddler dropped his juice and screamed like it was the end of the world. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in months. My job was piling up. My middle kid had a cough that wouldn't quit, and Tom was in Texas trying to get promoted. At that point, I didn't need perfect. I needed possible. Dana sent Marcus my way with a casual "just meet him. He's really good with kids." Like actually good. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe someone in his 40s with a soft voice and sensible shoes. But when I opened the door that Tuesday morning, I saw someone entirely different. He was young, 28, he told me later, but he carried himself like someone older. Calm, gentle, not overly cheerful, but warm in a way that made my anxious 6-year-old stop hiding behind my leg within 30 seconds. He bent down and introduced himself to each of the kids, eye-level, no baby talk. Then he asked if he could take them outside for a bit while I finished my coffee. 5 minutes later, I peeked through the window and saw all 3 of them laughing, chasing bubbles like they hadn't smiled in days. That was the moment I exhaled. I offered him the job that afternoon. He said yes, with that same quiet certainty he brought into every room. No show, no ego, just presence. From day one, Marcus never felt like a stranger. He came in early, stayed late. He remembered birthdays. He packed better school lunches than I did, healthier too, which the kids somehow didn't mind. He folded laundry with podcasts on in his earbuds and never once complained about glitter stuck to the carpet. But what surprised me most wasn't how well he handled the kids. It was how he saw me. Not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way. More like when I looked like hell after pulling an all-nighter with a sick toddler, he'd leave a hot cup of tea on the counter with a sticky note that said, "You're doing great." Really. It wasn't romantic. Not then. But it was the first time in a long time that I felt noticed. And that has a way of sneaking up on you. It started with little things. Marcus would be in the kitchen early packing lunches while I made coffee. Sometimes we'd talk about small stuff, music weather, the latest ridiculous thing my son tried to flush down the toilet. But sometimes he'd ask things no one else did. "You sleeping okay? You look tired today. Bad dreams." He didn't just fill the silence. He noticed it. With Tom, silence was routine, expected, something I learned to live with after years of military life. But Marcus filled the room with something else presence, and I started looking forward to it. On Ella's birthday, we threw a backyard party. Just cupcakes, bubbles, and a few neighborhood kids. Tom FaceTimed for 45 seconds, then hung up with "gotta jump into a briefing." Typical. Marcus stayed late to help clean up. After the kids crashed from sugar highs and excitement, I found him in the kitchen wiping frosting off the table. "Big day," he said. "Bigger mess?" I smiled. I poured 2 lemonades, handed him one. We sat at the counter. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after the chaos, soft, almost sacred. That was the first time our eyes lingered too long. Neither of us said anything, but something passed between us like an understanding that hadn't been spoken yet. I went to bed that night thinking about nothing and everything. After that, I became aware of Marcus in ways I hadn't been before. The way he laughed from the belly. The way he remembered what snack each kid liked best. The way his eyes softened when one of them fell and cried. I noticed him noticing us. And maybe more than that, I noticed how unnoticed I'd felt in my own home. I told myself I was being ridiculous, just grateful, just tired, just human. But something kept pulling my thoughts toward him. Harmless thoughts, I told myself. He's kind. He's just thoughtful. He probably leaves tea for all the moms. But then came the moments that didn't fit into excuses, like the time our fingers brushed when he handed me a towel. Too long. Too still. Or when we laughed at something the kids said and stopped laughing at the same moment but kept looking. I didn't plan it. Neither did he. But something was shifting. Not loudly. Not wrong. Just quietly undeniable. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the nightlight casting shadows across the ceiling. Tom lay beside me, his back turned, breathing steady like always. The heater clicked on in the hallway. I lay still, eyes wide open, heart far from still. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. Not in some over-romantic fantasy way, but in fragments, moments that had replayed themselves quietly in my head all week. The way he handed me the cup of tea without a word, just when I needed it. The way he noticed when I hadn't eaten. The way his eyes softened when the kids laughed. I turned over and pressed my face into the pillow. What am I doing? I'm a mother, a wife. I'm not the kind of woman who gets swept up in a few kind gestures and lingering glances. And yet, something had shifted. I hadn't looked for this. I hadn't planned any of it. But it had slipped in slow and subtle like water, finding the cracks in old wood. At first harmless, now impossible to ignore. Tom was here physically, but emotionally, He'd been gone for a long time. I'd gotten used to his absence, even when he was in the room. So what did that make Marcus a kind soul? A temporary lifeboat, or proof that I was starving for something I didn't even know I'd lost? I didn't have answers. Only the quiet realization that I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. Heard. Present. Not as a mom. Not as a wife. But as me. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The weather was unusually warm for early October, sunny crisp, just cool enough to need a light jacket. The kids had been bouncing off the walls all morning, and Marcus offered to take them to the park while I caught up on work. At first, I said yes, but as soon as the front door closed behind them, the silence in the house felt too loud. I couldn't focus, couldn't sit still. 15 minutes later, I grabbed my coat and walked out. When I got to the park, the kids were already running wild, laughing, climbing, chasing each other under a canopy of golden leaves. Marcus stood by the edge of the playground, hands in his pockets, watching them with that soft smile he always wore when he thought no one was looking. He turned when he heard my footsteps. "Didn't think we'd see you out here," he said. "I figured I could use the fresh air," I replied, smiling. We found an empty bench, a little ways off, still within sight of the kids, but far enough to talk. The kind of quiet corner that feels private without being hidden. The conversation started with the usual school lunches, Ella's latest obsession with bugs, my middle child's constant negotiation tactics. But soon, his voice dropped a little. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Just tired?" I answered, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. He didn't press, just nodded like he understood more than I was saying. There was a pause, a long one, the kind that stretches out until it asks for something more. I almost told him about the weight, the loneliness, the way the walls of my marriage felt more like a hallway I kept walking down, never finding a door. But I didn't. "I'm fine," I said, instead forcing a small smile. Really? He didn't call me on it, didn't push, just looked at me for a moment longer than he needed to, and then turned back to the playground. But in that silence, I knew he knew. The rain had been steady all day, but by evening it turned into a full storm. Thick sheets of water slammed against the windows, and the wind howled like something ancient was trying to get in. Tom texted around 8:30. "Flight canceled. Stuck in Dallas overnight. Sorry." No explanation. No "how are the kids?" Just another postponement, another absence. The kids were already in pajamas watching a movie in the den. I stood by the back door, watching the trees sway violently in the dark. Marcus came in from the porch, soaked from retrieving a forgotten toy. "That storm's not letting up," he said, wiping his arms with a towel. "You're not driving in this," I said firmly. "It's fine. I'll wait it out a bit, Marcus. You're staying. The couch is yours." He hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks." Later, after the kids had fallen asleep, and the house was wrapped in that rare, sacred stillness, I made 2 mugs of tea. I found Marcus sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, with his feet tucked under him like he belonged there. "Thought you could use this," I said, handing him the mug. "You always bring tea when I need it." He smiled. "Maybe I learned it from you." We sat in the soft glow of the living room lamp legs, crossed blanket shared across our laps, without thinking. We started flipping through photos on my phone, pictures of the kids' school plays, birthdays, bubble baths. Then a photo came up of Marcus and Ella, both covered in flour baking cupcakes. I laughed. "That was the day she dumped an entire bag of sugar into the bowl," I said. "And then called it sparkle powder," he added. We laughed. Then we didn't. The silence that followed was heavy, but not awkward. Something shifted. He looked at me, really looked, and I felt it in my chest. A thud, a pause, a pull. He reached up slowly, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and rested his hand there for a second too long. Then he leaned in, gently, hesitantly, and kissed my forehead. I looked up, and before I could think, before logic or guilt or reality could interrupt, I leaned forward too. Our lips met softly, quietly, just once, just enough to know it happened. And then Mommy Ella's voice floated down the stairs. We both froze. I pulled back. He sat up straighter. I should check on her, I whispered. Yeah. Of course. I stood heart-pounding, tea-untouched lips, tingling with the weight of what almost was. It was nothing. And everything. The next morning, the house smelled like toast and cinnamon. Marcus was already in the kitchen, flipping pancakes like nothing had happened. He wore the same sweatshirt from the night before, sleeves pushed up, face calm, maybe too calm. I hovered in the hallway for a moment watching him. He moved like he always did, quiet, efficient, present. But now I was painfully aware of every detail. The curve of his back, the way his fingers tapped twice on the pan after each flip, the same hands that had touched my face, the same lips that had kissed mine. I walked in slowly. Morning, he said, without turning around. Morning, I replied, voice smaller than I intended. The kids came bouncing in, asking for chocolate chips in their pancakes. Marcus laughed, obliged, joked about sugar monsters. I stayed busy, pouring juice, wiping the counter, doing anything to avoid his eyes. He didn't try to meet mine either. And yet there was something in the space between us. Not coldness, not tension exactly, but something like unfinished words suspended in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. We didn't. Thanks for staying last night, I said softly, once the kids ran off to get dressed. Of course, he answered, still not looking at me. Storm was no joke. That was it. No mention of the tea, or the blanket, or the kiss. Just silence wrapped in politeness. But as I stood by the sink, pretending to scrub a perfectly clean dish, I realized something had shifted. We hadn't crossed the line, but we'd stood right at the edge, and both of us had seen what was on the other side, and neither of us could unsee it. It was a Thursday. The air had turned colder. The leaves were starting to fall faster now, blanketing the yard in yellows and reds. I was making grilled cheese for the kids when Marcus asked if we could talk after dinner. My stomach dropped. After we'd cleaned up, he stood in the doorway of the kitchen, hands in his pockets, eyes softer than usual. I've been offered a position back near home, he said, closer to my mom. They need some help, and it feels like the right time. I nodded, smiled even. I asked all the right questions. About logistics, timing how the kids might handle it. I played the part. But inside, something cracked. Because I knew. We both knew. This wasn't about geography. It was about space, boundaries, about stepping away before the silence between us became something neither of us could control. His last day came sooner than I wanted. A quiet Tuesday morning, no fanfare, no goodbyes from Tom, who was on another trip. Marcus gave each of the kids a parting gift, hand-drawn sketches. Ella got a picture of her riding her bike with training wheels. Ben got a superhero version of himself in a cape. Josh got a picture of the treehouse he'd always talked about building. And then he handed me a small envelope. No words, just a nod. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, I opened it. Inside was a sketch of our family. Me, the kids, even Tom, all smiling, all together, but not him. He had drawn himself out of it, and somehow that made it the most honest thing he'd ever given me. The porch creaked softly beneath me as I settled into the old wooden chair. It was just past midnight. The air was crisp, cool enough for a blanket still warm enough to keep the windows cracked. I held the sketch in my lap, the drawing Marcus left me, our family happy complete, without him. It was quiet. No thunder, no wind, no children calling from upstairs. Just the occasional chirp of a cricket and the soft hum of the fridge through the open kitchen window. I looked at that drawing like it held an answer, a reason, a closure I didn't ask for, but maybe needed. And then I let myself remember. The feel of his hand brushing my cheek, the weight of his eyes on mine in that moment before the kiss. The kiss itself barely there, but more honest than anything I'd felt in years. I didn't regret it, but I didn't want it again either. It wasn't something that needed to continue. It wasn't meant to become a secret or a scandal. It was just the brief crossing of two lives. One searching. One offering something it didn't mean to give. Maybe Marcus showed up not to be anything, but to remind me of everything I'd forgotten how it felt to be seen, to be human, to be more than a title, and that reminder, however fleeting, was enough. I folded the sketch and slipped it back into the envelope. My chest still ached, not from loss, from understanding. Some love doesn't need to be pursued. Some connections aren't meant to stay, but they still matter, and they stay with you in quieter ways. In the end, we didn't break the rules. We just stood too close to where they blurred. And maybe that's the part no one tells you about being an adult, that sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between right and almost right. What Marcus and I had wasn't a story of passion. It was restraint. It was two people standing at the edge of something tender and choosing not to fall. That choice didn't make me weaker. It made me someone I could live with. Because in a world that constantly asks us to want more, to reach further, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to know when to stop. So if you've ever been there, if you've ever felt something real and still walked away, subscribe to this channel. Like this video if you've ever had to choose peace over impulse. And tell me in the comments, what's a moment you didn't act on, but never forgot? Your story could be the reason someone out there finally forgives themselves.